Hello everybody. In this video we're going to be looking at episode 4 of Hitler's Circle of Evil, titled Anti-Semitism. And this episode basically starts off in 1933, where it left off in episode 3, The Fall of Rome. And it goes into those first 5 years of Nazi power. But I felt it was a little bit off because it kind of jumps from 1933, I think, I think it goes through 1934, then 1935, and then all of a sudden it's in 1938 with Kristallnacht, or the Night of the Broken Glass, where they attacked and killed the Jewish people. So being titled The Rise of Antisemitism, it focuses a lot on the Nazis' policies, legislation, and basically discrimination of the Jewish people, both ideologically and also physically, by like beating them up, arresting them, taking their property away, and murdering them essentially, and the beginning of what would become the concentration camps, the rise of the concentration camps with Himmler. Now we must remember that Himmler and Göring were the ones who staged Rome's murder in the last episode. So Himmler is a kind of ruthless guy at this point. He's a self-made killer. So that's interesting. And in this case, well, let's get into it. In 1933, the Nazis rise to power. Goebbels hates the Jewish people. In the documentary, it goes so far as to say that he hates the Jewish people even more than Hitler. And this episode, I was kind of like, what were they trying to achieve here? Because they basically go on an all-out campaign against the Jewish people, and I felt like that was, if you get to power and then you just start attacking even against public opinion because the public wasn't really into it, I mean, you're basically jeopardizing your own political career. No, why would you do that? I guess this is just for pure hatred. I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is I have a hard time understanding the hate towards the Jewish people, or hate towards one particular group of people. Like, where does this come from for the Nazis, right? If you're saying, well, they actually hated anybody that was not Aryan, okay, I understand that. But there was a particular hatred towards the Jewish people. Why them in particular? And I guess it may be because they were wealthy, or they have the stereotype that Jewish people are wealthy. Okay, Göring is tapping phones, so he has that to his advantage, which he's going to use later on against Goebbels. And Himmler is in the shadows, right? So March 24, 1933, Hitler is the chancellor. Hess is the deputy of the Führer. Rudolf Hess hasn't really been like shown in these last couple of episodes. Like, we don't really know what he's been up to. He's just kind of there managing the day-to-day stuff. But they say that like his role is going to be important because the other circle members are going to end up like casting him out. But then he's never mentioned again in the episode. So I'm like, what's going on with Hess? Himmler is head of the SS, and he wants the police force, which I guess this was a different thing, right? The German police force was different than the SS. And Göring has Prussia, but then basically they start insinuating how it's Goebbels versus Göring. Goebbels, remember, he's the head chief. He's the minister of propaganda, and Göring is the minister of the interior minister of Prussia, which is the biggest German state, and he's also in charge of the Air Force, right? So their task at this point in 1933 is to fix the Great Depression. In March 26, 1933, Goebbels and Hitler basically sit down to discuss anti-Semitism. And this is funny because they say, well, they're promising the people Brot und Arbeit, which is bread and work, right? And they're trying to say how they're going to change the German economy and all this stuff, and they're going to bring Germany out of the Great Depression, while Goebbels and Hitler are discussing basically how to get rid of the Jewish people from Germany, right? And this is kind of like where it gets weird, because it's like, why are you focusing on that when you have political power, when you're in charge, when you can be doing other things, right? So they're basically trying to figure out how to do this with the Jewish people, right? Um, Goebbels, this is the part where they say Goebbels may hate the Jewish people more than Hitler. And Goebbels tries to spin this as like the Jewish people are Germany's problem, and they're an enemy of the state. So we're gonna boycott Jewish businesses. So that's like their first move against the Jewish. We're gonna boycott Jewish businesses. Goebbels wants to make it public, and Göring isn't really into it. So this is like the first discrepancy, and you're gonna see why Goebbels at the end he ends up getting in trouble. He ends up getting in trouble a lot, but he's basically, to me, like the second Rome. You know, Rome from last episode, he was very revolutionary, like in your face, direct revolutionary, right? And the rest of the inner circle were just kind of like, no, we're gonna do things the right way, the legal way, right? We're gonna play the long game, drip by drip, as they say in this episode. And they end up killing Rome, right? They don't end up killing Goebbels, but Goebbels in this case has like that mentality of like, let's make this public, culturally, ideologically, with films, with radio, with newspapers, with mass media. Let's do this against the Jewish people, right? And the rest of the inner circle is like, no, we're gonna do this, but we're gonna do it discreetly, quietly, right? So anyway, he wants to make it public, and Göring isn't really into that. Göring, they say he was anti-Semitic, but he wasn't. He was more in a practical way. He wasn't much in your face like Goebbels, and he even had a Jewish grandfather, and he grew up with that kind of ostentatious, opulent lifestyle, rich lifestyle. So Goebbels starts writing articles. This is the first discrepancy we see here between Goebbels and Göring. Well, they had mentioned how Göring had lost his wife a couple episodes ago, and how Goebbels and Magda, his new wife, became like the elite couple. But that didn't really bring anything beyond what they mentioned. But anyway, here they face off again, I guess, with different ideologies on how to take on the Jewish problem, which they call. So he starts writing articles, and on April 1st, 1933, Rome's SA. So here I was like, why are they using the SA, the thugs, again? I guess because they were still active. But they did mention that they dissolved and they became like a ceremony, like ceremonious or ceremony people. But I guess they're here outside of the Jewish businesses that they're trying to boycott, and they're basically telling people they're not using force yet. They say it's not the terror state that it eventually becomes, Nazi Germany. At this point, they're just outside of Jewish businesses, and they're telling people not to shop there, not to buy anything from them. A lot of people listen, but others don't, and others are just kind of like, get out of my way, SA guard. You know, I'm here on my normal everyday business stuff. Like, who are you? Like, and the SA don't do anything, because at this point they're not, you know, they're just kind of like, okay, I guess, like, we're telling you not to not to use Jewish businesses, but if you still want to do it, I guess it's okay. So signs are appearing. This is where they start. I guess this is where they, at this point, they start making. I know from Viktor Frankl's book, A Man in Search of Meaning, he was a Jewish psychiatrist, psychologist, writer, and he was in Germany, I think, or around this area in Austria when all of this started happening. The German people eventually invade Austria. So he left the United States. He survived, but after the World War. So he watched like his family members die. It was very sad. But basically at this point, the SA don't know what to do. The propaganda minister, Goebbels, he spins it as a success. Oh yeah, because the Jewish people, because this boycott of Jewish businesses basically doesn't go according to plan. So but Goebbels still spins it as a success, and he basically threatens. So yeah, like I was mentioning, I guess this is the point where they start making them wear like the Star of David on their arm, and they graffiti or they paint the Star of David, you know, the pyramid and then the inverted pyramid together on the walls of the businesses, and then they just put Jude, which is like Jewish in German. Um, so Goebbels, he spins it as a success, but it's not a success. So he needs to convince the people, the German people, that the Jewish people are a problem, because the German people aren't really listening at this point. They're just kind of like, whatever, dude. Like, you're just racist, probably. But, Goebbels at this point says, I'm going to play the long game. I'm going to get into their heads drip by drip, right? Manipulate them with propaganda, with mass media, culturally. So he starts nationalizing all the media. He wants to have like a media kingdom, right? He's using films, radio, newspaper, all of the, like anything he can get his hands on to communicate to people. And the propaganda here starts getting broadcasted into the streets and into people's living rooms with radios, right? At this point, each state, each German state controls its own radio station. And since Göring is the interior minister of Prussia, Goebbels is like, hey, let me broadcast in your radio station in Prussia. And Göring is just like, no. So they fight. And then for now, like, Göring wins, right? The argument, he's like, like, I'm not going to give you access to the radio broadcast in Prussia. So like, whatever, right? And I guess they start doing like political maneuvers to kind of mess with each other. I think the first one is going to be Goebbels. Goebbels is going to attack Göring by going to Hitler. So at this point, we kind of jump from like Goebbels and Göring, Goebbels versus Göring, to Himmler, right? And at the end of the episode, like, all three of them converge into what's happening. And obviously, Himmler thinks like Göring, where they not really thinks, but they're together against Goebbels, because Goebbels is kind of being like loud about everything he wants to do. So Himmler favors discretion. He starts getting Jewish and communists arrested, but he tells the public that they're being treated justly, which the historians in the documentary found to be like weird. They're like, why would he say that they're being treated as normal people? Why is that emphasized? Shouldn't all people that get arrested be treated as normal people, right? And I guess Himmler has like a deep hatred of Jewish people, but he, they compare like Himmler, unintentionally Himmler, with Goebbels, where they say like Goebbels was passionate about, the Jewish people, like he wanted to get rid of them, he wanted to kill them, but Himmler was passionless about it. He wanted to do it in a systematic, cold way, which I'm like thinking that's brutal, right? Yeah, and in the cow Munich, the first concentration, or one of the first concentration camps, gets established. In this case, it's hidden, and 4 Jewish people die in that camp. Goebbels persuades Hitler he needs the full radio control of the country, and he starts attacking Göring, saying things like, insinuating like, there are people in the party that are ostentatious, that are like projecting this rich lifestyle, because Göring came from like he was the socialite, so he comes from that like wealthy, looking good appearance and all that stuff. And Goebbels kind of saw that like, as not being socialist, not being with the party. So he starts attacking his lifestyle, but not directly. Very interestingly, the historians say you couldn't attack another Nazi member openly. You had to do it like subtly, like saying people in the party are, acting antisocial, right? Not with the socialist movement and things like that. And then Hitler, I guess at this point, he makes a speech, and he attacks ostentatious people, basically Göring, and Hitler demands Göring to give radio control of Prussia to Goebbels. So at this point, Goebbels now wins. So then the secret state police, which is the Gestapo, controlled by Göring in Prussia, it turns on Goebbels. It starts spying on Goebbels, as it was spying on many of its members. But Goebbels is like, whatever, he gets to work. Through programs, in this case drip by drip, he starts doing mass manipulation on the people of the Jewish people, and radios are mass produced. At this point there's like 1 million, I think, in 1 year. So people are kind of like, oh yeah, like Germany's really prospering now. But a lot of other people are seeing that the economy is not really prospering just because a bunch of radios get mass produced. And he uses the newspaper also for spinning, right? They have this idea of like, we're going to get people to work, we're going to have construction programs, which they don't mention it in the documentary, but I think a lot of these construction programs were actually the construction of concentration camps and things that they were going to use for the extermination of the Jewish people, right? Goebbels does what he does best, which is propaganda. At this point, he's showing videos of like people working, Germany prospering, and Hitler at the forefront, people together with Hitler leading them, building a nation, right? And they have this idea called Volksgemeinschaft, which is the people's community, a classless society, and promises of better times in the future, right? So very populist mentality at this point. They're in the middle of a crisis and they're like, we are what's going to give you hope. We are the hope of the future, basically. They keep talking of a racially Germanic state, but people are noticing that the economy is not going well. There are actually spies that get sent out there to report back on public opinion. So I'm kind of thinking like, I think the FBI had already been formed, but it's interesting how a lot of spy agencies in the 20th century started coming about, right? I know before that there were spies. I think the Russians have always had spies. But yeah, it's interesting how they take spies and they put them in the public domain for them to basically come back and report like what's the public opinion on the Nazi party, right? And people aren't really like believing them at this point. They're like, yeah, whatever. And they're basically starting to say you're either with us or you're not. There's no gray area, right? And your race makes you or not. So basically they start blaming the Jewish people and they're using them as a scapegoat. At this point, they've been blaming them a lot. So I'm thinking, a lot of people are actually believing this because of so much bombardment, years of, your politicians and the people in power are blaming the Jewish people. I think a lot of people just started to believe it. There's street violence, but it's not good. Hitler doesn't like this, so he's against the street violence. He's against the physical demonstration, especially by the SA guards. And he orders it to stop because public opinion is decreasing, right? So there's like a contradiction here. Like, were people really starting to believe? Were they not? I'm guessing there was confusion about what to believe also. And Goebbels isn't having it, right? Goebbels keeps on pushing for more anti-Semitic agendas. In Nuremberg, in September 1935, there's a Nazi propaganda display, which is yearly, I guess. And they announced the latest policies. Hitler is basically like on a rant against communism. And then Goebbels gets up and he's on a rant against the Jewish people. So they say this was Goebbels' gamble because Hitler could have been like, no, like we're not going to go full blown out publicly against the Jewish people. Goebbels, in this speech, he declares the Jewish people as enemies of the state. And basically the whole rally is behind him. So then Hitler's like, whatever, like if the people are with it, I guess, they kind of show, they're basically focusing on Hitler's henchmen in this series. So Hitler comes off as a chill guy, as a guy that's just kind of like, okay, I know he really wasn't like that. I don't really know how he was. As a leader, I haven't seen like a documentary or know much about his personal like leadership style, which I guess was ruthless, was inflexible, and was very, like intolerant to people. But he comes off as a chill guy here. He's just kind of like, okay, if the people are with it, I'm cool with it, like whatever, right? So then a bunch of anti-Semitic legislation gets passed called the Nuremberg race laws, which strip Jewish people of their citizenship. They can't marry. But then they start debating about what is a Jew, right? Because, this opens up a can of worms, they say, because what if you're half Jew? What if you're a quarter Jew? What if you've only got like, what if you convert as a religion? What if you marry into it? Like, does that count? Does that not? So they're arguing about this. And there's a disagreement. Goebbels pushes for the most extreme view, which I'm guessing it's like if you have any drop of Jewish blood in you, you're Jewish, right? And they compromise on the three grandparents rule, which is like if you have three grandparents that are Jewish, then you're Jewish. And basically, they get denied education, employment, and legal rights and citizenship, right? State sponsored completely, which again, it's kind of like the state shouldn't be meddling in these type of things, right? But anyway, Göring isn't invited at this case, so he's kind of like, what? Because he was made to look bad by Goebbels earlier. But this is like Göring's revenge. He's like, okay, now it's my turn. He's busy with the Air Force, but he starts to expose Goebbels. He uses the Gestapo and the intelligence that they have collected on Goebbels to expose Goebbels' private life, which again, remember that Goebbels is involved in cinema and films, and he's the center of German culture, right? And he's basically cheating on his wife Magda with movie stars, right? So he's at the movie studios, and Göring is using wiretapping. He's bugging, like all of the Nazi members at this point, also Goebbels. And he finds out of the relationship, the extramarital relationship that he's having with Lydia Bavarova since 1936, who was a Czech woman, playing like sexy roles. And this is interesting because the German people wouldn't have, or the Nazis didn't want to have German women play these sexy roles because they thought it was demeaning. So they would bring in like foreign sexy women to play these roles. And then, Goebbels would get with them, I guess. And Göring gives the dossier or this report to Hitler. Hitler doesn't like this. He has no time for this because he was, remember, best man at Goebbels and Joseph Goebbels and Magda's wedding. I keep saying Goebbels, but his name is Joseph, right? But his last name is Goebbels. But anyway, he gets angry at this. And this is kind of funny because, in such a dark episode, I thought it was funny how they mentioned this, but they say Magda finds out eventually, and Magda looks for Hitler, for marriage counseling. So Hitler gets involved, right? And then at Salzburg, which is Hitler's mountain retreat, Hitler and Magda sit down to have a chat, right? Magda's like, Goebbels is messing up, he's bringing humiliation to me, to our marriage, to our family. And Hitler talks to Goebbels, basically giving him an ultimatum. He says, either you figure this out or you resign, right? Because they would mention how when Hitler would go to the Goebbels family, he would spend a lot of time like talking to Magda. So I guess Magda and Hitler were like good friends, Goebbels' wife. And he ends, this is funny too, he ends the affair with Barbara, obviously, because he's like, I'm not going to risk my marriage, my political career, not like Nazi Germany's future on a girl. So he breaks up with her, and since she was already tainted, she gets fired and her acting career ends, right? So they say it was a double whammy for her, which, yeah, like, damn. Goebbels maintains his position, but he's tainted with Hitler. They say basically after this point, he's not really, and I guess this is 1936, right? So that does, 1936, that gets mentioned, 1937, we're guessing that's around here. And he, Goebbels is kind of casted out, not officially, but it's kind of like that thing that happened, but nobody really talks about, but it's kind of there, right? So yeah, everyone's disappointed in Goebbels at this point, I guess. And Himmler kind of takes over that power vacuum against the Jewish people that Goebbels kind of leaves behind. So at this point, since the 1920s, they mentioned that Hitler has been wanting to reunite Germany with his homeland, Austria. Let's remember that Hitler is not from Germany, he's from Austria. And I guess, I don't know if they got this wrong, but they say in March 1933, Germany invades Austria. Now, I was checking online with ChatGPT, and it says that it didn't invade Austria physically, even though they show images of like the armies marching into Austria, or at least that's what I think the video clips were of, but more politically, because they officially invade Austria with troops in 1938. In 1933, it was more of the influence, excuse me. So I don't know if they got this fact wrong, this point wrong. But Himmler and the SS basically take control of Austria at this point, and they kind of make Austria their testing ground for their anti-Semitic policies and legislation. They start experimenting with these policies. You know, the Jewish people basically get their property taken from them. They get humiliated. They want to get rid of them at this point, not exterminate them. And in Austria, it's a success with Himmler and Heydrich, because remember, they're working together at this point. Goebbels just kind of stands by as Ernst von Rath, a Nazi diplomat, is shot and wounded by an attempted assassin who is Jewish. So this is basically like the crisis that everyone was waiting for in order to propel their anti-Semitic policies, like full-blown into the public domain, right? So what happens here is Himmler starts to rally the SS guys. He's ready to attack. He's ready to drive the Jewish people out. Himmler and Goebbels basically are both like super anti-Semitic. And on November 9th, 1938, so at this point we're already in 1938. See, this is the part where I think they got mixed up with March 1933, Germany invades Austria. It was actually March 1938, or it must have been 1938, because November 9th and November 10th, 1938, Van Rath dies from his gunshot wound, and they say that Hitler basically gives a green light for everyone to go against the Jewish people, right? He says, and I quote, "Hold back the police, let them feel the wrath of the German people," right? Which they insert something like that, or I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along those lines. And at this point, Goebbels declares war on the Jewish people, like publicly. But Himmler is kind of like, whoa, like this is not what we want to do. We want to do it discreetly, right? So Goebbels wants like a nationwide public manifestation of this. I don't know if this is kind of like what Trump did maybe on January 6th, where he was like, yeah, and then like, you know, things get out of hand, and then they're kind of like, whoa. And then Himmler doesn't like it because he has spent a lot of time like doing things the right way, doing them discreetly, right? This is the part where they mention like he has spent a lot of time doing things systematically and passionately. I think that's correct, like without passion, right? Which I thought was, again, like brutal. Like it's not like I'm doing this because I'm rallied up and I'm hyped up and I'm energetic, like, yeah, and emotional. No, it's like I'm doing this like in a cold, very methodical, you know, logical way. Like I want to kill these people. I'm just like, whoa, like that's crazy, right? That's pathological. So at this point, the chief for the German police, which is Himmler, I don't know how he got here, but because he was in charge of the SS, and they don't mention when he takes reign of the German police, but I guess he's the part of the German police now, or he's chief of the German police. Himmler, along with Heydrich, tried to regulate this, right? I think they basically like throw out reports or rules of engagement to try to regulate and calm the whole thing down, right? And they say like the SS is not getting involved. They're to wear pedestrian clothes. You know, they I guess they say like you can take the Jewish people's things, but you have to bring them to the authority. You can't destroy things. You know, you can't burn things. Like you have to just, you know, like you can attack them, but without ensuing chaos, basically. It's like something like that. And Goebbels doesn't care. He unleashes hell. And this is when like Kristallnacht comes about. They say in less than 2 hours after Rath's death, The SS don't get the rules of engagement, they say. So the SS, again, the SS, no, sorry, the SA are still here in 1938 after they were dissolved back when Rome died in 1932, 1933. So it's like, what are the SA still doing here? But anyway, I guess they're around and they go all out. They're burning, they're destroying. People are getting beat to death. 100 Jewish people are murdered. 30,000 get sent to Jewish concentration camps. And Goebbels gets what he wants, right? But Göring, at this case, he's super pissed because of the destruction, which I thought was also kind of funny. They're kind of like, they're mad at Goebbels because Goebbels destroyed the city with this, right? And he's like the person behind all of this like chaos. So then Göring is like, who's gonna pay for this? Like it's our country that they destroy. Like what the fuck, right? It's bad for the economy, and so is Himmler. Himmler's also mad because they're like Himmler and Göring, I guess, are more methodical, more calm, more logical, more cold and calculated than Goebbels, right? And they want to do things discreetly, quietly, which I find it to be fascinating because Goebbels is a Scorpio, so you would assume that as a Scorpio he would want to hide things, but he's actually like more out there, right, for a Scorpio. Even though you see the intensity in the propaganda that to this day still fills our heads when we think of the Nazi Party, right? That's all Goebbels. So there's the Scorpion intensity, right? But he does things like so in your face, so out there, so extravagant, right? And Göring and Himmler at this point, they're like the ones that want to do things but efficiently, effectively. Like I was watching an episode of The Walking Dead, and the soldier Abraham wants to get to DC fast, and then Rosita, his companion, basically tells him like, I want us to actually get there. Because if you're doing things so ruthlessly, so recklessly, we're eventually going to be done for, right? So you need to do things calmly, seriously, the smart way, the slow way, play the long game, drip by drip, right? In order to effectively get there, to actually get things done, right? So Himmler is mad, Göring is mad. Himmler wants Goebbels out as well. Hitler steps in, and they say it's a crucial moment, but eventually Hitler, takes Goebbels' side publicly or within the inner circle. Which again, if we go back to November 9th, I mean, Hitler did say like, hold back the police, let the Jewish people feel the wrath of the German people. So it's not like Hitler wasn't complicit, like he didn't give the green light, right? So yeah, he takes Goebbels' side. Goebbels is good, but he makes enemies, right? Basically now with Himmler. And see, I can understand all of this politicking and all of this rivalry at this point. I didn't understand it before because before it was just kind of like, I felt like it was dramatized and it didn't really happen. Or if it did, they didn't say why specifically. But at this point, I understand why, right? Because Goebbels is going against like, Göring and Himmler's wishes, which is to do things like quietly and not to destroy their own property, which, now who's going to pay for that? Göring is kind of asking, right? At this point, Göring they say he was very materialistic, and as a Capricorn, I can believe that. Himmler was Libra, so, which again, for the hiding thing, the politicking thing, I can understand because Libras are very good diplomats. But Heydrich, I think when he brought Heydrich in, which was, he was a Pisces, I guess that's what gave him like that fantasy element of like really, Libra and Pisces working together at this point, make things, make that fantasy like a reality through the social element, right? Through Libra's social elements. So yeah, Göring wants to know how to pay, and Goebbels says, well, we're going to make the Jewish people pay, which again, they say is horrendous, it's ridiculous. Like, how are you going to attack a people and then have them pay after they were attacked and murdered and arrested, right? And I guess they fined the Jewish people 1 billion mark. And they say more importantly, and this is like the end of the episode, it marks a precedent, because after this, you can expect people to just flat out use violence against the Jewish people, which again is a heavy episode, this episode. Excuse me. And you kind of understand the dynamics a little more, the power struggles. I was looking up information on Hitler, like his leadership style, and it just basically said that he was intolerant and flexible. He was paranoid. He was distrustful of people, and that he actually manipulated, I don't know to what extent, the inner circle for them to basically grasp and fight for control. So I don't know how much he had to do with this inner struggle between like Goebbels and Himmler and Göring, right? Like I said, Rudolf Hess isn't really in the picture at this point. He was only mentioned in the beginning. He's there doing the everyday tasks for Hitler. He's his first disciple. But anyway, this is where we end. This episode basically talks about the years 1933 to 1938. Again, I think they got the date of Nazi Germany's invasion to Austria wrong. I'm not sure it was 33, it was 38, because that's when everything happens with Kristallnacht, and that's just right before Kristallnacht, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, let me know what you think about this episode. So far, each episode has been 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. I'm not sure if the next ones are going to be 5 years, because that would probably, there are 10 episodes, and this is episode number 4, so that would take us like all the way to 1960, 70, I don't know. But yeah, I think they're going to start to slow down and really get into the whole, like the beginning of the World War, right? Beginning of World War II, the invasion. I guess the first country they invade is Austria. The last one, I was looking this up, is Czechoslovakia, I think, or Slovakia in 1944. The Nazi Empire was at its top in 1942. They extended, I think, to parts of Egypt, all the way to Russia. They covered all of Europe except for England, or the British Isles. But they do start in Austria in 1938 with Anschluss, which is basically the annexation of Austria, right? So we know that World War II officially starts in 1939 with the invasion of Poland. So they're going to get into that. That's going to be interesting, because I don't remember why that causes a world war, right? Like officially. Why then the invasion of Austria? Oh no, Czechoslovakia is the second one on October 1938 with Sudetenland, and March 1939 with Bohemia and Moravia. And shout out to one of my students. He told me that the eagle that actually has his wings expanded outward, like left and right, is the imperial eagle, because it wants to expand its territory, as opposed to the republic eagle, which has its wings like coming down, seen as how they're going to protect or cover their own territory, their own people, right? So I thought that was interesting, because Nazi Germany is an imperial country, an imperial power, was an imperial power at the time, and that's why it has its wings outward, right, to the left and to the right. So I found that to be interesting. Shout out. And that's all I got for this episode, so I'll see you in the next one. Okay, peace.